History is a map of forgotten front lines, where battles weren't always fought with weapons, but with ideas, identity, and survival. Welcome to Forgotten Fronts, where we uncover the turning points that shaped our world, the wars, the revolutions, and the human struggles history tried to bury. In this episode, we journey through one of the most enduring and complex conflicts of the modern age, the story of Israel and Palestine. From the fall of empires to the birth of nations, from exile to hope, this is the chronicle of a land divided by faith, memory, and time. Let's begin. In the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire stretched across the eastern Mediterranean. Among its provinces lay a small land at the crossroads of three continents, a land revered by three faiths and known to many names: Palestine, the Holy Land, the Land of Israel. For centuries it had been home to a mosaic of people, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, living under Ottoman rule. Daily life was shaped more by harvests and trade than by politics. Yet, beneath the calm rhythm of empire, new ideas were forming across Europe. In the age of nationalism, communities everywhere began seeking self-determination. Among Jews scattered across Europe, rising anti-Semitism and the dream of return gave birth to Zionism, a political movement calling for a homeland in the historic land of Israel. In 1897, at Basel, Switzerland, Theodor Herzl convened the First Zionist Congress and declared that the Jewish people needed a state of their own. At the same time, Arab nationalism was awakening within the Ottoman world. Intellectuals in Damascus, Cairo, and Jerusalem spoke of an Arab Renaissance, a revival of language, culture, and independence from imperial powers. Two national ideas, each rooted in identity and memory, would soon converge on the same soil. When World War I erupted in 1914, the Ottoman Empire sided with Germany. Britain and France fought to carve up the Middle East for strategic gain. In 1917, London issued the Balfour Declaration, promising support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, but also pledging not to prejudice the rights of existing non-Jewish communities. That single sentence carried hope for some and deep anxiety for others. As the war ended, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. The League of Nations granted Britain control over Palestine as a mandate, tasking it to prepare the land for self-government. Yet the terms of that mission were already contested. Jewish immigrants began arriving in larger numbers, buying land, founding kibbutzim, and building new towns like Tel Aviv. Arab farmers, fearing displacement, organized protests and petitions. Britain found itself balancing two irreconcilable expectations. Through the 1920s and 1930s, the population of Palestine changed rapidly. Waves of Jewish immigrants fleeing European persecution, especially after the rise of Nazism, brought new skills, capital, and determination. Arab Palestinians, seeing land prices rise and holdings shrink, formed political committees and armed groups to demand majority rule and an end to mass immigration. Britain tried commissions and white papers, each proposing a different compromise. None held. In 1929, violence erupted in Jerusalem and Hebron. In 1936, a full-scale Arab revolt began. 3 years of strikes, ambushes, and harsh repression that left the land scarred. By the decade's end, British patience was exhausted, and Europe once again drifted toward war. As Hitler's armies spread across the continent, the persecution of Europe's Jews reached terrifying new levels. For many, Palestine seemed the last refuge. For Arab Palestinians, the fear of losing their homeland deepened. Two peoples, each wounded by history, stood on the same ground, each claiming justice, each certain of its right to exist. The British Mandate, intended as a bridge to peace, had become an arena of confrontation. In 1939, London issued a final white paper limiting Jewish immigration and promising eventual independence under joint rule, a promise that satisfied no one. Within a decade, the world would witness the Holocaust, the birth of Israel, and the First Arab-Israeli War. And thus the stage was set, a narrow land where centuries of faith met the 20th century's harshest storms. The Second World War ended, but peace did not come easily to the land between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. In Europe, 6 million Jews had been murdered in the Holocaust. Entire communities were erased, survivors left wandering among the ruins of their continent. Many looked to the one place where the idea of refuge still seemed possible: Palestine. British authorities, already weary from war, tried to limit new immigration, citing Arab opposition and the fragile balance of the mandate. But Jewish underground groups began smuggling survivors into the country, defying naval blockades and detention camps. Each arrival ship stirred sympathy abroad and anger within the region. In 1947, after years of violence and failed mediation, Britain announced it would withdraw. The newly formed United Nations took up the question and voted for partition, to divide the land into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem placed under international control. For the Jewish community, the decision meant long-awaited recognition. For Arab leaders, it was an injustice imposed by foreign powers. The following day, fighting erupted between neighboring towns and villages. What had begun as a political proposal became a civil war between communities that had once shared markets, fields, and water. On May 14, 1948, as the British flag was lowered in Tel Aviv, Jewish leaders proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. Within hours, the armies of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq crossed the borders. The First Arab-Israeli War had begun. The fighting was fierce and chaotic. Israel, though outnumbered, was organized and motivated. The Arab states were divided in command and aim. By early 1949, ceasefire lines were drawn that left Israel in control of more territory than envisioned in the UN plan. Jerusalem was split, the west under Israeli control, the east, including the Old City, under Jordan. More than 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes during the war. They scattered across refugee camps in neighboring countries and in the West Bank and Gaza. Israelis called their victory independence. Palestinians remembered it as Nakba, the catastrophe. 2 narratives of the same event began to shape every conversation that followed. In the years that followed, new borders hardened into uneasy frontiers. The West Bank was annexed by Jordan, Gaza came under Egyptian administration, and Israel absorbed hundreds of thousands of Jewish immigrants from Europe and the Middle East. The region settled into a fragile truce, punctuated by border skirmishes and occasional raids. Refugee camps grew into towns. Children were born who had never seen the villages their parents left behind. Diplomatic efforts stalled as mistrust deepened. In 1956, another storm gathered. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, angering Britain and France, who still held economic interests there. In secret, the 2 European powers made a plan with Israel. Israel would invade Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, giving London and Paris a reason to intervene. The operation began swiftly. Israeli forces advanced toward the canal. Egyptian troops fell back. But international pressure, led by the United States and the Soviet Union, forced the attackers to withdraw. Militarily, Israel demonstrated strength. Politically, it showed the new reality. Global powers now dictated the Middle East's fate. The decade that followed saw alternating moments of calm and tension. Across the Arab world, a sense of humiliation grew. Refugees remained in camps, their future uncertain. Guerrilla groups began operating from neighboring territories, launching cross-border attacks. Israel responded with reprisal raids, hoping deterrence would bring quiet, but often achieving the opposite. By the mid-1960s, a new generation of Palestinian activists emerged, forming the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, to speak for the displaced. Meanwhile, Israel's security concerns deepened as alliances shifted and rhetoric sharpened. Regional competition between Egypt and other Arab states made compromise difficult. In June 1967, tension reached its breaking point. Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping and mobilized its army in the Sinai. Israel, fearing encirclement, launched a preemptive strike. In 6 astonishing days, its forces captured the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. The military triumph reshaped the map once more. For the first time since antiquity, Jews controlled all of Jerusalem. For Palestinians, the defeat was devastating. Many who had fled once before were displaced again. The conflict had moved beyond partition. Now it centered on occupation, identity, and the question of return. The ceasefire lines of 1967 did not bring peace. They marked the beginning of a new chapter in a struggle that would continue for generations. In the span of 2 decades, borders had shifted, populations had scattered, and history's oldest city stood divided yet again. The dream of security for one people had become the loss of homeland for another, and the world watched a conflict that no longer belonged only to a small strip of land, but to the conscience of humanity itself. The Six-Day War of 1967 left the map of the Middle East forever changed. In just 6 days, Israel had captured territories 4 times its own size. The swift victory astonished the world, yet beneath the triumph, new and enduring dilemmas took root. The question was no longer about borders drawn by empire, but about people living under military rule, about land, rights, and recognition. After 1967, Israel found itself governing more than 1 million Palestinians in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. These areas, once under Jordanian and Egyptian control, became known as the occupied territories. Israeli settlements began to appear, at first small and scattered, later growing into towns and cities. For Palestinians, the occupation transformed daily life, movement restricted by checkpoints, lands expropriated, and local leadership suppressed. For Israel, the newly gained lands offered security depth, but also moral and political complexity. The lines between defense and domination, between homeland and host, blurred with every passing year. 6 years later, in October 1973, on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack. The Yom Kippur War raged for weeks, with heavy losses on all sides. Though Israel eventually repelled the assault, the shock was profound. The myth of invincibility faded. Public debate turned toward the need for peace. Out of that war came diplomacy. In 1979, after secret talks at Camp David, Egypt became the first Arab country to sign a peace treaty with Israel. The Sinai Peninsula was returned, and for the first time, an Arab leader and an Israeli prime minister shook hands before the world. Hope flickered, yet Palestine remained unresolved. In the 1980s, the conflict spilled beyond traditional frontiers. Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, aiming to expel the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, which had established bases there after being expelled from Jordan. The campaign achieved its military objectives, but drew criticism as civilian casualties mounted. The PLO relocated to Tunisia, far from its people. Inside the occupied territories, frustration turned to defiance. In December 1987, the First Intifada, meaning uprising, erupted. It began with street protests, strikes, and stone-throwing youths confronting armed patrols. The images spread across the world, showing the human toll of years under occupation. The uprising lasted 6 years and reshaped perceptions of the conflict. No longer seen only through state borders, but through the daily struggles of ordinary people. Out of the turmoil came a cautious dialogue. In 1993, after months of secret talks in Norway, Israeli and Palestinian representatives signed the Oslo Accords. For the first time, both sides recognized each other's right to exist. The Palestinian Authority was created to govern parts of the West Bank and Gaza. The world watched as Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Yasser Arafat shook hands on the White House lawn, a symbol of peace that seemed within reach. Yet progress faltered. Extremists on both sides resisted compromise. In 1995, Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist, a wound that tore through Israeli society. In the years that followed, mistrust grew, violence returned, and new walls, physical and political, began to rise. In 2000, renewed tensions ignited the Second Intifada, far bloodier than the first. Suicide bombings, military incursions, and urban warfare scarred both societies. Thousands were killed. Confidence in peace collapsed. Israel built a barrier wall along parts of the West Bank, arguing it was to prevent attacks. Palestinians saw it as a tool of separation, slicing through communities and farmland. The physical landscape mirrored the emotional one, divided, fortified, and weary. In 2005, Israel withdrew its troops and settlers from the Gaza Strip, hoping to reduce friction. But the vacuum soon filled with political rivalry. The Islamist movement Hamas won elections in 2006, and a year later, it seized control of Gaza from the Palestinian Authority. The result was a divided leadership, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, Hamas in Gaza, each claiming legitimacy, neither able to speak fully for all Palestinians. Periodic clashes, rocket fire, and blockades turned Gaza into one of the world's most densely populated and fragile territories. Cycles of confrontation and ceasefire followed, leaving deep scars on both sides. In the years since, multiple efforts at negotiation have come and gone. The Annapolis talks, the Arab Peace Initiative, and proposals by international mediators. None have produced lasting resolution. Generations have now grown up knowing only division and uncertainty. Yet amid the fatigue, voices of cooperation persist. Academics, activists, and families who have lost loved ones and still advocate coexistence. Their work seldom makes headlines, but it keeps the idea of peace alive in small, stubborn ways. Today, the conflict endures not only in borders and politics, but in memory, in textbooks, in refugee camps, in military service, and in the silence of grieving families. The story of Israel and Palestine is a story of people who share the same sun and soil, yet remain separated by history's hardest questions: security and sovereignty, justice and fear, recognition and survival. The world still debates who holds the greater claim, but history reminds us that peace does not come from victories. It comes from vision. The future of this land, sacred to billions, depends not only on agreements written in capitals, but on understanding written in hearts. And so the story continues, not finished, not forgotten, still waiting for the day when walls become memories and borders become bridges. You've just heard another chapter of history retold, not as sides, but as stories that shaped our world. If you believe the past should never be forgotten, subscribe to Forgotten Fronts. Every week, we uncover the battles, the choices, and the human moments that built our present. Because history is not over. It's only waiting to be remembered.